Stephen King is the master of horror. Actually, I'd say he's more like the king of horror. Pet Sematary is widely accepted as one of his scariest books, if not the scariest one of his books. In this video, I will be reviewing Pet Sematary by Stephen King. This was the most horrifying book I've ever read. It's the most horrifying anything, any movie, show. This was the scariest. Even if I told you everything that happens in this book, you still wouldn't fully understand how scary it is. I'm not really a big horror fan. I don't dislike it, but I don't really go searching for it either. I read this book because a lot of people said it was a good book beyond just being a good horror book. I've been waiting since 2019 to read this book, and I finally chose to read it this year. It was a terrifying but necessary read that ultimately teaches the reader the price of grief. I love making these reviews, but they take a lot of energy and time. So if you could hit that like button and subscribe, I'd respect you more than the person that listens to you in a group when no one else is listening to you, which is a lot of respect because I respect those people a lot. If you do subscribe, I promise my left middle toe that it'll be worth it. On to the Pet Sematary book review. Pet Sematary is about a family who moves to Maine in a new house, and behind their house is a trail that leads to a pet cemetery made by the local children. This pet cemetery has a strange power that allows children and anyone to bring their pets back from life, but it has a consequence. The consequence is grave and destructive. So, first thing I want to talk about when it comes to this book is the writing in the descriptions. It's truly what makes this book so horrifying. If King weren't such a great writer, I don't think that this would be scary. It's disgusting. The idea is disgusting, but it wouldn't be as scary without the descriptions, the subtle hints, the subtle details that suggest things to your mind and allow your imagination to do the rest of the work. I think that's the key thing here. He's not overly descriptive, actually. He just, like I said, he gives you little hints and nudges to kind of point you in the direction, and then your imagination does the rest. With that being said, I think this book might be scarier for some people than others, depending on your imagination, which is a really interesting thing. If you have a more darker imagination, you might find this more scary. If you don't really have that kind of imagination, maybe you won't find it as scary as I did. I don't know. But the writing is really what brought this book together. Now, in terms of gore, there was surprisingly little. I mean, there was a lot of gross scenes, but like I said, there wasn't anything that went into insane detail about someone's guts or anything like that. It was pretty light on the gore side. I wouldn't really even say any of the like gore or action is what truly made this book scary. It's more the idea, the connection the main character has with the other people in the book and the people he cares about and the thoughts he has, the way he looks at the world, and then when that mixes with the events of the book, that's what really makes this book terrifying, and it makes you kind of think and wonder, and it makes you a little existential, I think. So if you're not really in the mood to feel existential, I definitely don't recommend this book, but it's not really gory. If you don't like gore, don't read. I mean, this might be a good horror book for you if you don't like gore. If you do like gore, that's not really what this is. It's more the idea. One of my favorite parts about this book is the foreshadowing. The foreshadowing is so perfect. It's like you kind of know what's going to happen, but you don't know how, you don't know when, and you don't know how, like, the way it's going to happen, I guess, if that makes sense. I already said how, but uh, it's perfect foreshadowing. There's a scene where I was reading it on my phone in the ebook, and I thought the chapter was over, and then there was one more line that really set the stage, like really made you think something weird is happening here beyond than what you originally thought. And it was just on the next page. So there was just one page that just had that line, and it was just foreshadowing, and it really gave me chills because it makes you realize that this is freaky. And it's not, like I said, it's not gory, it's just uh ominous, I think is the right word. This book is very ominous. The other thing that I kind of already talked about is the main character. The main character is really interesting. He's kind of dark. He's a little cynical, a little nihilist, I guess you could say. He's also humorous too, I think, but he also cares about people. He's not selfish. He is a little selfish, but he's not like uh, he cares about people, which is important for this book. It's all about grief. If you don't care about people or care about things, you can't grieve. And I think it's really interesting because in the beginning he has this idea of death, that it's natural, it's nothing to worry about. But then he starts to realize that that's easier said than done. It's easier to say, "Oh, it's death is natural," but then when it actually happens, it's like that shouldn't happen. So it's really interesting, and he makes the book fun almost because he's kind of twisted. Like he's kind of this weird guy, but not like creepy. He's just kind of, I mean, I think we're all a little bit like him, where we kind of all have those dark thoughts in the back of our mind, those intrusive thoughts, but you kind of see that more in this character, and obviously it shows more and more as things get more crazy. So I really like this character. I cared about him a lot. That's the other thing that I think is really important, is when you care about the characters. I cared about this main character a lot, and because I cared about him, I cared about his family, I cared about his friends, I cared about everyone that he cared about. So it just shows that King knew how to make a good character. And he's honestly, Lewis Creed is his name. I should have said that. Lewis is one of my favorite characters I've ever read about. I think he's awesome. Now let's talk about grief a little more. Grief is a really tough thing because I think it's about loss that you can't take back. Grief can be more than just someone dying, right? You can grieve over uh, a loss of a job, or loss of a friend, maybe, like maybe not in a death sense, but maybe the friend moved away, or you lose something you love, like maybe you lose a love for something, and that kind of has its emptiness that you can't really replace. You can't replace something that you lost, I guess. I mean, you kind of can, but like when it's something you really cared about, you can't replace it perfectly. And this book is obviously more on the side of grief about death. And that's even harder because that, I mean, there is no way to go back from that, obviously. But then in this book, there's things that happen where maybe you can come back from it, but again, there's a cost. So the grief is a really tough subject, and King is pretty blunt with it, honestly. Like, it's not a subtle thing, it's not gentle, it's right in your face. It makes you really sad. Honestly, this book is depressing. It's not light, it's not fun, it's not exciting, but I think it's important is the more right word. And it's not that it's not fun in a bad way. I don't want this book to be fun. It's as it should be, but I'm just telling you as it is. Grief makes it a hard book to read. So that's kind of why I waited so long to read this book, because I feel like I had to be in the right mind, because there's a lot of stuff going on lately. So it's not a book to read when you're fragile, I guess you could say, which sometimes that's the perfect time to read a book, just not this book. There's one major thing that I didn't like about this book, and it's pure, I mean, I don't want to say it's purely subjective, but it is pretty subjective. You might not care about this at all, but there's like two descriptions in this book that just kind of set me off. Like it just didn't match the character, in my opinion. So I won't get into specifics, but I will tell you generally what was happening. I'll just give you one example. Basically, he was giving CPR to an old lady who was having a heart attack, right? And while he was giving CPR, he stops and looks at her breasts and wonders what they looked like when she was younger, and he imagines how how men on the street would have been so attracted to them, and that's just weird. That's just weird to think about when you're giving someone CPR. And I understand it does kind of fall under the intrusive thought sort of line, but I just didn't like it. I thought it was more creepy. I don't really think Lewis is a creepy guy. I think he's more like disturbed, but not creepy in that sense. More creepy to himself, I guess, in his thoughts. But that pulled me out of the scene. It made me just think that's weird. And there was another scene, of course, he's talking about breasts, and it's unnecessary, I think, and doesn't, like I said, doesn't line up with his character. You may completely disagree. Maybe it really is just an intrusive thought. It's not like he ever does anything weird, obviously. It's just a thought. But I didn't like it. Just something to think about. It didn't ruin the book or anything. But it's just unnecessary, and I think the book would have been better without those small descriptions. I promise it's like 2 sentences, maybe 3 in the whole book that are like that. But I don't know. Actually, it does kind of spend like a paragraph talking about something like that. That's just kind of weird. But it doesn't ruin the book. I think it did. If it weren't for those scenes, I would have given this a 5-star. But I'm also just not a big horror fan in general, so I think I didn't really enjoy it. That's why I couldn't give it a 5-star. But just something to think about. This is not an easy book to read, but I agree with those who say it's an important book. After all that, it's just an extremely well-written book, too. The flow, the dialogue, the descriptions, the details, the subtle details that I talked about, the diction or word choice, all brings this story that really makes your skin crawl, and it's horrifying. Like I said, there were a few things that I didn't like that I thought were unnecessary, but overall, I think it's a good book. I give it a 4 out of 5 stars. If you watched all the way to this point in the video, thank you. You're cooler than a popsicle in a cooler. If you don't mind, please subscribe and hit the like button. That would be super awesome. It's just 2 buttons on your screen, so please do that. I spend a lot of time on these videos. Check out my book, The Cards That Are Dealt. The link is in the description. Thank you for watching, and have a phenomenal day.